Welcome back, everyone. My sincere hope is that most of you got to enjoy lunch before we ran out a little bit, and hopefully we had some substitute snacks for you if we did. We are now here for the anti-debate, which is perhaps the first of its kind. There's some debate about this. I believe.
Debate about that.
Yeah, there shouldn't be a debate about it. Very bad. Yeah. So this idea was born out of, I think, a 1 or 2 sentence comment that Bill McCaskill left on the CEO forum at some point about how, like, here's a new event format for you, like, have a thing, he used the word anti-debate, I think, where it's just, like, not so adversarial. So from that, our organizing team sort of came up with a format that's kind of focused very heavily around 2 people who share maybe a lot of philosophical underpinnings but come to different conclusions, and sort of giving them a format to both like prove to each other's satisfaction that they understand the alternative view, and I can identify the significant differences between them, and perhaps make progress towards finding common ground. So I'll mostly just be like keeping time and moving us forward through the different stages of this as we go along. We have with us today to debate nuclear nonproliferation as an effective cause area, Professor Max Tegmark from here at MIT. He's in the business department. He's the co-founder of the Future of Life Institute and the science director at the Foundational Questions Institute, so his credentials are appropriate. And Matthew Gentzel, who is a grad student at the University of Maryland doing international security and economic policy work. And he'll be starting at Johns Hopkins this fall to do advanced international studies. So he's also very sensitive to the topic at hand. So and without more from me, I think we're just going to go ahead and get started by letting each of our anti-debaters introduce himself, and more specifically, his genuine view in very sumerical fashion, starting with Max Tegmark. Thanks.
All right, so I'm not a pacifist. My position is not that we should immediately get rid of all our nuclear weapons, but I do have the position that the 7,000 nuclear weapons we have now and the 7,000 the Russians have are way more than is necessary for deterrence, and that if we significantly cut our nuclear arsenals rather than spending more money upgrading them, we would actually all be safer.
Hey, I'm Pat. So my position is that the arms reductions, like to get US below like 1,000 and Russia below 1,000, that doing that, given like increases in like dual-use modern sensor technology, will put us in a case where deterrence is undermined, and it will only have like redundancy as the way to maintain mutually assured destruction. And if we don't have redundancy, then there will be destability.
Great, thank you both. And moving quickly on to stage 2. So each of you, again, being housed in your genuine personal views, can you hit us with 2 or 3 of the hardest questions that you think your anti-debating counterpart might give you?
Okay. Should I go 3 or do you want to alternate us?
I can go first if you want.
Well, if we keep the hidden, I guess. I'll go first. So I'll say, first of all, if we reduce our nuclear arsenal, won't that make us less secure?
Oh, I was thinking that.
Or should I rattle off 3 then? Okay.
Just rattle off 3.
Okay. And then second, wouldn't this just, if we do that, wouldn't that just be playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un and so on? Isn't that exactly what they want us to do? If we think they're not ultra nice, maybe that's a bad idea. And finally, how can I stand here and say that I think that would make us more secure when in fact it seems like having these nuclear weapons has avoided major power conflict since 1945?
So for me, three strong objections that I might have some trouble with, or that I just haven't fully wrapped my head around yet, would be something along the lines of like problems with the planning fallacy. Like maybe just because it seems like something's unstable doesn't necessarily mean it is. Like there's a lot of classified information that we don't know about different things different countries deploy, so maybe deterrence won't necessarily be undermined by futures technologies. Another would be like, is it even like a good idea to really be like criticizing arms control efforts? Like in general, the ones that are like good ideas are probably like actually going to be in the country's interest to agree to. So maybe just like general negativity in this direction isn't like useful if we want to foster good relations between countries. And then the last one is like, does mutually assured destruction even like depend on nuclear weapons anymore? Like there's economic interests tying countries together, and it could be the case that like we just don't need nukes, but I don't know.
Great. All right. Great middle self-deprecation from both of you. Really appreciate it. Now we're going to transition to a part of the format where things kind of switch, and rather than like expressing your own view or even criticizing it, you're just going to go full on into your counterpart's view. And I think next go start.
All right, so I'm going to try to channel Matthew. I don't know if I should put on your jackets. Okay, so Matthew has a number of quite interesting arguments. So I want to make 5 points here. Let's start with one point where we have common ground, where we actually agree, which has to do with this basic idea that deterrence can work. And it's not trivial that we agree on this, because there are also a lot of people, especially in the peace movement, who reject the entire doctrine of deterrence. Okay, but the basic idea of deterrence, I think, Matthew, think it does work. The basic idea is that if you nuke me, I'm going to nuke you back. You'll regret it, therefore you won't nuke me. And we have, even when Khrushchev said, we will bury you on a famous hot night in the 60s, he actually never did launch a nuclear strike on us because of mutual assured destruction. The Russians knew that it would be suicide for them to ever attack us. And there's been a lot of very elegant game theory analysis of this, going back to Herman Kahn and others in the 60s. And I think the basic argument is really quite solid. If you have the situation that both parties know that their nuclear weapons are not accurate enough to pull off a successful first strike and sneakily destroy all the enemy's missiles and hydrogen bombs, but that they are accurate enough to take out the enemy's big cities, then nobody has any incentive to start this war, because they're both going to get completely trashed as a result. Okay. And it is quite striking, if you look at the statistics, look at how many wars there were between the leading powers throughout the 1700s and 1800s and so on, all the way up to 1945, and how since then we haven't had any war like that. Okay, so the second point, so now I, Matthew, will start disagreeing with Max, is the point that the United States really, we have our nuclear weapons strictly for deterrence. Deterrence is a good reason, and that's really the only reason we have them. We don't have them for any other reason. We don't have them, for example, just to bully people or to do what some people call compellence. It's just for deterrence. We have them so that to make sure that Putin and everybody else knows never try to nuke us or invade us or something like that. Now, the third point I want to make is deterrence, unfortunately, is being weakened by new technologies. It used to be great when back in the 60s because we had missiles that were accurate enough to hit Moscow, but not accurate enough to hit close enough to the Soviet silos that we could destroy them. So the Soviets were not very stressed that we were going to do a first strike. And same for the missiles going in the other direction. But that is changing. You all know about GPS. There's been fantastic progress in all sorts of tracking technologies, satellite navigation and space navigation and so on. So now we have missiles that are much more accurate. Our current nuclear missiles can really strike within a few hundred meters of their target, and now we are here in the US investing another 1 billion or 1.2, so 1 trillion 1.2 trillion in making our nuclear weapons even better, even more stabilizing. So one of the things we're doing is making them able to hit not within 300 meters, but within 150 meters. And we have to do this because the Russians are doing the same. When they get this close, when they can hit this accurately, they can actually take out our missiles, and they know exactly where our land-based missiles are. So this weakens the deterrent power of our land-based missiles. Another really worrisome technical development is nuclear submarines. They used to be, by many people's standards, the most stabilizing things of all, because even though the Russians knew where we had our nuclear missile silos, the ICBM silos, they didn't know where our nuclear submarines were. So even if they could take out all our ICBMs in the first strike, that wouldn't do them much good, because a few minutes later our nuclear submarines would surface, and then after that there will be about 1,000 mushroom-shaped clouds at strategic locations throughout Russia. So they wouldn't want to do that. But now there's also a lot of progress in having underwater drones that secretly track submarines from the enemy power, kind of know where they are. And that's terrifying for us, because what if the Russians do a sneak attack and just destroy all our submarines? And then also, and third, there's also been improvements in the ability for air defenses. If you've seen films like Dr. Strangelove, we had these bombers that flew in over Russia and basically got through and dropped hydrogen bombs. But the Russian air defenses are also better. So this technological progress is weakening deterrence. Okay, we want deterrence because we agreed that this was good. Because of this, what we really need to do, first of all, is make sure we have lots and lots of nuclear weapons. That's why it would be a mistake to reduce from 7,000 to, say, 900 or so, because we need lots, so that the Russians can't be confident that they will ever succeed in a first strike. And Matthew, I'm of the opinion that this is a real threat, because I'm really worried that the Russians will actually do a nuclear first strike at us, if they can. And the way to prevent that is to have so many nuclear weapons that this won't happen. And fifth, we have to talk about the risk of accidental nuclear war. I agree with Max that this is a risk, and there have been a number of very close calls, and of course it would be really unfortunate if we accidentally got into a shooting war with Russia, and a lot of people died, maybe we would have nuclear winter, etc. And so we have to consider this trade-off. If we reduce our nuclear arsenal, yes, I agree that might slightly reduce the risk of a nuclear war, or it could also reduce how much damage the accidental nuclear war does, just because there are fewer bombs that go off. There might be less nuclear winter. But I argue that the risk reduction from having, the reduction in risk from nuclear war is actually outweighed by the increased risk that we're just simply going to get attacked by the Russians, because our deterrence we get weakened. And yeah, those are my 5 points. So in summary, I think we should of course we should do other things to just not escalate tension. We should avoid offending foreign leaders and doing unnecessarily provocative things. But we should really have stability through strength. We should keep large numbers of nuclear weapons. We should invest this 1.2 trillion and modernize our nuclear weapons, so that the Russians don't get the idea that they can take them out from a first strike. In particular, I'm a big supporter of the air-launched cruise missile, because no matter how good their anti-aircraft systems are, even if they can prevent our aircraft from flying in over Russian airspace and bombing them, they won't be able to prevent our aircraft from flying near the Russian border and then firing a nuclear-tipped cruise missile at them. And having that is good for deterrence, because if we ever get a little bit stressed about a complex situation, we can tell all our nuclear-armed aircraft to take off, and while they're just flying around, the Russians can't do anything about them. So they're immune to first strike, and then they can, if necessary, fly near the Russian border and fire these cruise missiles and thereby ensure deterrence. All right, I rest my case.
Okay.
You can see the beat.
Oh no. Max Tegmark would never concede defeat. So you can see. IMAX thinks some of the problems with nuclear war are accident risk, nuclear winter, wasteful spending, and like if both sides are just like piling money into this, you might like be undermining stability when someone gets advantage. So in terms of like accident risk, like going back to the 60s, like we've had like all sorts of like mistakes that have like led to real risks of like the USSR and the US nuking each other. Like the US has mistakes, like the moon rise is like Soviet missile attack, like there's just a big thing coming up and then your radars bounce back and it's like, oh, high probability that it's like a large attack because there's so much signature coming back. It's like, no. So I mean, there's been all these problems over time with almost accidentally going into nuclear war, and as long as we have nuclear missiles that are based in silos where they could be attacked, like they're targetable, they could be hit within like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. Like there's time pressure when accidents happen on decision makers on whether or not they're going to launch a nuclear response, and that could cause accidental nuclear war. And accidental nuclear war is the sort of nuclear war we should be most worried about because deterrence is probably stable. So in terms of nuclear winter, this is something we totally agree on. Like, there's going to be, like, if you have cities being nuked, you're going to have really high temperatures, you're going to be pushing up a lot of soot into the high upper atmosphere, and it's going to stay there a long time. And there's the risk this reduces crop yields, it reduces global temperature, and it could lead to starvation, like well beyond countries that engage in nuclear war. Like, it could be billions of people die, and it would be very bad if we had that outcome. So even if it like reduces the advantage of whatever our side is a little bit to reduce the number of nuclear weapons, it would still be a global public good for people to reduce their number of nuclear weapons. In terms of wasteful spending, nuclear modernization is estimated to cost $1.2 trillion over the next 30 years. That's a lot of money that could be spent in some way that would help people a lot more than just like developing new weapons. In response to the US, like having developed so much in the past 10 years, Russia and China have like developed a whole bunch of new delivery systems trying to catch up with us. If we set the example and maybe didn't like keep racing ahead, maybe they would slow down their development as well. I know I can't read everything. Well, anyway, in terms of maintaining stability, this is actually something we agree on. Not all of this, but like I actually do agree that the U.S. has like been pursuing compellence at various times. I don't think everything they've done has been like purely for deterrence. Like totally, U.S. has like.
Who are you now?
Who am I now? Oh, I'm Max Gentzel, whatever. But anyway. So yeah, we've like developed the superfuse so that sub-based missiles will still be able to destroy nuclear silos. Like various other tech advances have like clearly been in terms of enhancing the ability to do counter-force nuclear attacks, like types of weapons that aren't like particularly useful for attacking cities. They're very useful for attacking military targets. The US has totally been developing that, and that's not always like necessarily something you do just for deterrence. Because usually in terms of deterrence, you want to deter the adversary in terms of threatening their population. And basically, other part of my Max Tegmark's position is that like, only a few hundred hydrogen bombs are needed for robust deterrence between countries. UK, France, India, Pakistan, China, like they've all done this sort of policy. They haven't been nuked. Clearly it works. There's other models that indicate if the US and Russia did the same thing, that they would also be stable. So this is just getting at like the how much like Russia and China have like felt the need to catch up. And if they really want to reduce their spending, like we shouldn't just like modernize and make a bunch of new stuff for them to try to catch up with. That's like a lot of new nuclear systems that are going to be coming online soon, and I think we're going to be spending $1.3 trillion over the next however many years. That's going to be a lot as well. So my solution, my Max Tegmark solution is we're not going to get rid of nukes immediately. Like, there might be bad consequences to that, and maybe we don't have the political capital to do that, but eventually, like, global zero would be a goal. Gradual cuts to get the US and Russia below 1,000 nuclear weapons, that would be good for like reducing nuclear war and there's ways to do that. It could probably increase stability between the US and Russia. We want to, or I think we should halt the development of first use enabling technologies, and to the degree we can get arms control between US, Russia, and other countries involved on those particular technologies, that would be a good outcome. And it would reassure countries that aren't building up their nuclear forces that they don't need to, and that we should get rid of hair trigger alert and land-based missiles in order to reduce the incentive to respond in a, during an accident. Like, you think something's coming, and then you're worried about losing your missile, so you launch and actually cause nuclear first strike. So I think Max goes further to argue that things became this way primarily because of defense industry lobbying. Like, people just they have their money interests, they make a lot more profit if they're making more weapons. The US having wrong assumptions about Russia's motives in defense. We are assuming they're more hawkish than they actually are. They're not going to just attack us, pull out of the blue. We don't need to deter everything. We just need to deter things that would actually be realistic for them to do. And that the US has developed a lot of these systems because it's been seeking compellence. It's been seeking to win. So how do we get to the position where we are actually getting toward these reductions? One way to start helping get there is to increase the stigma against nuclear weapons. If the cost of possessing nuclear weapons exceeds the benefits of keeping them, countries might not keep them, so divestment, protests might help us get there. The need to set an example, escape might makes right politics would be a useful thing to do. Currently the US is a superpower. If we start reducing and start trying to set the norms correct for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, other countries might feel less threatened, they'll feel less cheated by superpowers holding onto their nukes, and we might have more success with the NPT. And that's all I have, or all I, Max Tegmark, have.
Okay, let's thank for no doubt compelling cases, but now, stage 4, I believe it is, we find out just how compelling those were for the actual people who hold the views expressed. Max, would you like to comment on Matt's presentation of the Tegmark view?
Okay, Max, do you want to comment on Matt's presentation?
I'm not actually that worried about Russia being oh, we can nuke the US soon. I don't think that's gonna happen. I'm just pointing out a trend in technology, and I think over time, this isn't a right now sort of thing. This is over the next 20, 50 years sort of thing, where eventually nuclear counterforce is going to be way more feasible than it is right now, and we need to be worried about the policies we set now for dealing with that situation. But I think for the most part, you got things accurate. I agree. The U.S. hasn't done all its developments just purely for deterrence. It's been trying to we've totally had people like Curtis LeMay, who are just we want to bounce the rubble and win a nuclear war. It's not all been deterrence. So I agree. The U.S. has not always been the moral perfection thing, but definitely the U.S.
Do you have more comprehensive comments about how compelling it was, whether you think there was any fundamental underpinnings missing, any assumptions?
In arguments I make online, I just get into a lot of details in technology, and it's hard to do that in 7 minutes. So I feel there's a way to make the arguments I would want to make more compellingly. There's someone at Georgetown, Dr. Kiera Lieber, who has this paper called New Era of Counterforce, which I think makes the arguments rather succinctly, and I think is a rather good argument that I haven't seen many arms control advocates respond to yet, and I'm excited to see how they respond to it. But overall, I think you fairly accurately portrayed my position.
All right, Matt.
Great. So if you felt that you're actually a little bit less hawkish than I portrayed you. I guess it's symmetric because I think I'm probably a little bit less dovish than you portrayed me. You said that I ultimately want to get rid of all the nuclear weapons. Again, that's not my position. My position is just that we should have less than we have now. And I'm less interested in quibbling about what the end goal should be. I'm more interested in what should we do, what direction should we go right now. And we will know so much more later. Better to have a broad coalition now and take a step in the right direction. It's like you summarized very nicely many of my points. I thought the main one that you didn't bring up, which I mentioned to you a little bit, was that we're EA global. This is the G here, the global, in the name of this meeting. I mean, it's quite interesting also to look at the global perspective, because a lot of people who don't live in one of the 9 nuclear powers, and that's most people on Earth, right? They view the US and Russia as 2 schoolyard bullies who just keep getting into stupid fights about stuff, and don't feel that it's really much in their interest. Like Brazil doesn't see it very much in their interest to have US and Russia being on the verge of getting into nuclear war. And this was why we saw the nuclear ban last year. So many countries have signed and joined, and this is it's this global aspect, I think, which helps understand what helps explain why so many countries are angry about the NPT, where 47 years ago the 5 nuclear powers then agreed that they were going to work really hard on disarmament if in return the others promised to never keep nuclear weapons. And now these other countries feel kind of pissed because it doesn't seem like Putin is at all serious about disarmament, nor Trump. And also that norm that new countries should be punished if they try to get new nukes was blatantly disregarded when India decided to go nuclear, and Pakistan decided to go nuclear, and Israel decided to go nuclear, and just got a slap on the fingertips. So I think this global perspective is interesting. As effective altruists, if you look at what's best for the entire planet, and the rest of the planet, I think, would strongly like to sort of rein in the bullies a little bit. And
I think I agree, like NPT violations should have been punished more. I'm not sure there's any counterfactual where we could have gotten the powers to reduce more earlier, but
for Article 6, in Article 6,
they're supposed to.
We promised people.
Yeah, we did. So
Right, you almost segued into the next section, quite naturally. But now I want to open the floor to both of you to ask each other some questions that you might have, to think about alternatives to either view that you've expressed, either as yourself or as your counterpart, and potential areas for compromise, identify some areas of overlap and such. So I'm just going to turn the floor to you. So
one question I'm trying to ask, based on the nice clarifications you gave, so you said that actually you agree that there has also been some compellence, and it didn't seem like you were particularly, or maybe you can clarify whether you actually think that compellence is something, nuclear compellence is something that we should do in the US, or whether you prefer that we have a deterrence-only nuclear posture.
I haven't fully settled my view on that. I think I can imagine scenarios where you want nuclear weapons for compellence, and that would be along the lines of possibly enforcing NPT or disarming, if North Korea were in the process of launching a nuke or something like that. I can see cases where you'd want the ability, but that it's once again it's limited cases, and I don't think it makes sense to be just building up the ability to do whatever you want in the world.
Okay.
Because that's destabilizing. Everyone's going to have to be forced to build up. So,
right. So is it fair to say though that what you feel strongly about defending is deterrence? You feel that that's the reason why you really want us to have lots of nuclear weapons. It's not for.
Right. I think the primary focus. I think there's things in I'm not sure about every particular thing that's in the nuclear modernization plan, but there is a subset of things in the nuclear modernization plan that I think will be necessary to maintain deterrence in a world where remote sensing technologies keep getting better, where speeds keep getting faster, Yeah, that's what I mean.
Well, so I get this. So then a question I have for you, which I didn't have before, which now that I understand, thanks to your clarification, that it is deterrence one. Then I'm very curious to understand better. If you look at that 1.2 trillion, what is actually going to be spent on, I totally get the part about why you want the air-launched cruise missile, because it improves our deterrence to be able to get through the Russian air defenses. But I don't understand why you want us to quote one of our leading defense officials, want to do upgrades to our nuclear arsenal that makes it more usable, as they say. Why we want to have our missiles be more accurate at targeting so they can be more likely to take out the Russian nuclear silos. How does that, I would love it if you can help me understand how that helps deterrence.
So I haven't fully established my position on this particular thing. The argument they make is that it's more credible that you'll use it in a deterring attack. Like if the US thinks it's just going to murder a whole bunch of civilians, it might be less likely to retaliate, is the argument some people make. I'm not necessarily sure that's a great argument. So I'm not as decided on that. The case where I think those capabilities make the most sense are with cases where you expect like attack from North Korea or something like that.
So thank you. So to help you understand, I appreciate it. How does my ability as an American to take out, to destroy a Russian nuclear silo help my deterrence when the nuclear silo, if I use it for deterrence as a counterstrike, then when I hit the silo, it's already empty anyway, because I'm by definition retaliating, right? So why do I want to have the ability to destroy Russian nuclear silos except for first strike?
First strike, they're not going to launch their silo-based missiles, or like it makes it. In the arsenals that people are likely to deploy, if they wanted to like pull off a first strike, like launching something in a silo is just really obvious. There's a big IR signature. If you're trying to do a first strike on someone, you're not launching silo-based missiles unless you think they're like not able to respond. So I think that it would just be you're undermining their position. But that being said, I do agree. Like I think just the ability to hit silos is not like necessarily about deterrence. The case with North Korea is that you're destroying their ability to like do more after they've like used nuclear threat. So it'd be like if there's some sort of conflict and they use a nuclear weapon to like halt the conflict, and you're worried about escalation continuing, like just being able to eliminate all the nuclear targets without creating so much fallout that you're killing millions of people, like in Japan and like South Korea. Like I think that ability might be valuable. That being said, it's possible to get that ability without things that would be useful against Russia. So like I'm not fully decided on how the accuracy aspect of modernization should go. However, I think there's a lot of complexity here, and that it's possible, like, I could see something changing and going either way. Like the argument with the air-launched cruise missile, like, I changed my mind multiple times when, like, reading through the arguments just about the complexity of modern air defenses and how AI will improve targeting of aircraft. Like, it could be the case that people will also be able to shoot down the air-launched cruise missiles, and then it's not enhancing deterrence. So, like, all contingent.
Would you have any sympathy for people in Russia and elsewhere who perceive our efforts to make our missiles better at taking out their silos as us improving our first strike capacity and something that makes them could make them more jumpy and nervous that we want to strike?
Sure. Though I think some of those other papers would argue that, like, to some degree, the US has like already had these abilities, and now it's just a matter of like not also killing a ton of people while doing that. So like it's really I don't know if I'd be like more or less at ease. Like I think like they have reason to be sympathetic to like that's like bad for their interests and like they should be worried. But not that they should be worried. Like it just makes sense to be worried anytime an adversary is like developing weapons. Does that make sense? Like, yeah, I mean, what would you be worried if someone you have interests conflicting with is making more accurate weapons?
Well, yeah, but I would react very differently if my adversary builds defensive anti-aircraft missiles, whereas if they build weapons that are specifically optimized for first strike against me and are useless for defense, right?
But I mean, missile defense can also be very useful for strike, because if you can destroy many targets and you suspect that only very few things will come back, then like it's very contingent on what the whole basket of technologies is, which way these technologies overall go on offense-defense balance, and we don't necessarily know which way it's going to go in the future unless like we're able to like predict accurately how all these technologies will interface. So it's like countries are just going to be racing to have option value. If you want to regulate this, there's many, many different technologies we're going to have to regulate as a basket. If we can figure that out, I think that would be good, and that would be stabilizing, but I'm not like sure we'll figure that out.
Yeah, and this one we totally agree. I mean, I meant anti-aircraft missiles on our own borders, whereas I agree with you that building missile defense,
Right.
which can shoot down the few missiles that the enemy launches back at us, can be seen as just making me more likely to go to pull up the first strike.
Right.
Which I think is why the Russians have been so stressed by us putting missile defense on the Polish border and claiming it's to shoot down missiles from Iran.
Like, I can believe that. Like, yeah.
Thank you so much for clarifying those things.
Well, one of the points of this part of the conversation is to try and get into, like, I guess, alternate theories that, like, neither of us really holds that might be plausible. So, like, are there, like, other directions here that, like, policy could go that would, like, make sense? Like, because, like, it seemed like we both weren't actually aiming for, like, global zero. Is there any case where that makes sense? Or alternatively, is there a case where it makes sense to just like increase the number, or to like focus on some other aspect of technology? Like, I guess, what are things you're most sympathetic to? Like, what do you think you'd be most likely wrong about in a way that's like not confirming my position? It's just like something totally different.
I'll acknowledge that this was a challenging task for
Sorry.
a debate that there's this binary. But I mean, Max, could you?
So it's a super open-ended question. So there were two parts. The one part was, what are other positions that none of us hold? Would you like to
Right.
highlight that?
Is there, like, that you think are plausible?
Do you have any? Sounds like you have something in mind.
I was thinking maybe the economic deterrence thing, or maybe there's some first principles argument that, like, no matter how good the remote sensing technology gets, like, no one's going to be able to pull off a first strike. Maybe it's, I don't know, physics-based argument, timing and stuff. Like, I don't know.
I mean, one thing I feel in hindsight I was kind of wrong about was stuff that got declassified from the 60s, which is now more than 50 years ago, so a lot of stuff is declassified. Right? There, we talked a lot here in the US about the missile gap. How we had a missile gap, there were more missiles there than here, and this justified building up this huge arsenal here. And there was real fear here that the Russians were planning for a strike. And I think there's pretty good unanimity now among historians that there, first of all, was no missile gap. We had more than they did, and second, that the Russians were actually never really planning for a strike against us. They kind of realized from the get-go that this was just a suicide for them. But it strikes me that this is probably something where we agree, actually, that in any war, pretty much it's always in the interest of any leader to portray the other side as the more aggressive one, and everything to do with defense. So many countries have a Minister of Defense and a Department of Defense, but nobody has a Department of Offense. Right? So I think in hindsight, the Russians were not planning any first strike, and we could have survived with a lot less missiles. And maybe it's different now. I mean, I'm not saying, obviously Putin isn't a nice guy, but I don't think Stalin was a very nice guy either, and nor was Brezhnev. So I think I'm actually more nervous about people overestimating the threat they're under, and thereby putting everybody in a bad Nash equilibrium.
Right, so that was one of the things I was trying to get at with the whole, is it a good way to discuss this sort of thing. Like, maybe it makes things seem more adversarial than they necessarily need to be. There's maybe some like signaling value to just like pushing for arms control regardless. in terms of like showing good will toward people who've been building weapons against each other. So like, yeah, I don't know.
But a third position, which none of us is advocating, maybe we should bring up, like, since you asked about that, is the position that both the US and Russia should just really disarm, and which is the position most of the rest of the world has. A lot of people in the rest of the world has. That's the. I don't know if you have comments on feeling sympathy with.
Like, I think it would be probably destabilizing, but like, I just don't know how destabilizing. We don't have examples of like a superpower giving up their like ability, their coercive power. So like, I think historically it doesn't go well, but I mean, like Stephen Pinker makes arguments like we're in like more peaceful times. Like, I don't know how much the world's changed. I assume like a lot of things still are like constrained by hard power, and we don't really appreciate the degree to which that's true because like we've been resting on deterrence a while, but it's like hard to say. I think like democracies might be like more constrained in terms of like what they do, but it depends.
So, for example, I read an article recently by Ariel Khan pointing out that Brazil has never been invaded, even though they have never had a nuclear threat. So maybe that.
There's like another reason to invade Brazil, I think. or maybe you'd argue the Spanish did a long time ago before it was not called Brazil.
Portuguese.
You're Portuguese, right. They made a nice dividing line. So, what was it? Portugal and Spain would not go to war. They had to like bring in the Pope. It's like one of the few examples in history where you have a rising power and a status quo power not going to war. But the issue is they did go to war before that, before they came to the compromise. But I'll ignore that now.
I guess in the spirit of clarification, another issue which you articulated my point very well, I thought, about how it might not just be national security issues, but also economic issues driving the arms race to some extent, lobbying, but you never defended yourself against yourself.
So I think the economic argument applies more strongly for US and China than it does for Russia and the US. I think like Russia and the US are more adversarial in that regard. Like Russia exports like oil and weapons, and that's just like competition with the US. Like it's like there's not as much economic overlap of interest other than in the global stability of the economy. Whereas there's like way more economic overlap of interest between like the US and China.
But you didn't defend yourself against the strongest argument that you made against yourself earlier. Because you mentioned this issue that there can be lobbying, right? If defense contractors want to sell hydrogen bombs, more launch vehicles, they can try to spread fear so they can sell more. And this could happen particularly in countries where the nuclear weapons are made by private companies, like the US. But you never defend yourself.
Okay, so I think that's true, but if we look at defense budgets, like that one slide I showed with like deployments, like for the most part, recently at least, now once this modernization thing happens or doesn't happen, that will be a totally different story. But at least recently, like when the US increases its military spending, it's just like focusing on like a whole bunch of conventional forces. And like when Congress is like wiggling funds around, they're usually like increasing like numbers of main battle tanks or something like that. Whereas in terms of the nuclear forces, it seems like there might be like fighting between lobbyists and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the military is like, this is what we want. I mean, there's a lot of people in the military who really don't like nuclear weapons. Like, they're just like not usable,
right.
And they don't view that as like giving them an advantage. So like the lobbying can go both ways, and different contractors are competing with each other. So lobbying isn't always a decisive influence in the direction of like just increased weapons. Like there's multiple interests tied together, and like the degree to which I think the lobbying is relevant is like what different companies are lobbying for in terms of contract is like what they can build. There's many other possibilities of things that could be built. There might be like arsenal types that would be like more stable from like first principles, but like if no company exists that can like build that now or that like could lobby for it, then you're not going to get there. So like it's sort of just like constraints of like what is possible given what exists.
But now it sounds like you're defending this subversive organization, the Future Life Institute, terrible people. who were saying things like exactly what you said, that there's always lobbying for new attack helicopters and aircraft carriers and tanks and so on, and nuclear weapons. So if you stigmatize nuclear weapons, then it will strengthen those who want to use the military budget for non-nuclear needs, and which might be better off from an EA global point of view. And you didn't put the $1.2 trillion upgrade here.
Well, right, that's I just took from
it's not controversial that it's
This is not my graph, I just stole it.
Yeah.
It doesn't show the bottom,
But that
unfortunately.
was, some people would argue that was a pretty good lobby, right? 1.3 trillion.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, but it's also over a long time. And in terms of the overall defense budget, nuclear is a pretty small portion of the overall defense budget. If we were to like try to maintain the same abilities with conventional forces, it would be a lot more money. And yeah, I just don't know how the US would react. Like, would we then like actually like drastically increase military spending further because we've reduced nuclear? I'm not sure. Like, we probably can't afford that. But
I'm just still trying to understand exactly your position there. If you're saying that no, we want these 7,000 nuclear weapons, and we want to do the 1.2 trillion upgrades strictly for national security reasons, based on the kind of arguments that Matthew gave, or whether you think that lobbying might have helped inflate the nuclear spending.
so, like, yeah, I think lobbying could possibly have helped inflate, but I'm not, like, when I compare to other things in the military, I think this is like, lobbying impacts a lot of things, and for the most part, it's like less effective here in terms of like, there's like constraints the generals have in terms of what they're trying to achieve, and they will be like, I want blank capabilities. Like, what possibly can give me that capability? Like, there's a lot of just like general strategic reasoning. I don't think it's like, they're not winning because they throw more money at the problem. Like, they've come up with ideas that the military finds attractive.
Sure, of course, I'm going to agree with, I'm going to agree with you that there have been other things that the military contractors lobbied for also that were not necessary maybe and that weren't nuclear. Companies lobby for stuff, that's what they do. It's very natural. I'm just saying that I personally would prefer to take the 1.2 trillion and make a giant bonfire and burn it up. I think that would be better for national security. It would cause a little bit of global climate change maybe, you know, but I think it would be a net benefit. And so if this would be spent instead on more aircraft carriers or something like that, rather than nuclear weapons, I think that would make us safer too.
I think
so it doesn't sound like you're disputing that there could be some lobbying that explains certain parts of the upgrade.
So I think there's like aspects of the upgrades which might have been lobbied for that don't make sense from like a pure deterrence thing. However, like if we look at the systems, like ground-based strategic deterrent, like the Minuteman missiles are really old. If we don't like make a new ground-based missile, then you're getting rid of the whole, redundancy aspect of deterrence, and you're reducing the number of targets to a very small number in terms of one country gaining decisive advantage over another. So I think like there are things like that that are going to be a huge expenditure no matter what, if you want to maintain a given level of deterrence. And this stuff about like the accuracy is a little like finagling on the price. Like, I don't think that's like the majority of the expense. I could be wrong about the numbers there, but that's like my general impression. Like, I gave arguments for or you gave my arguments for like the air-launched cruise missile, that those imply like the B-21, the ground-based missiles, that's implied by like having to have redundancy. I don't know as much about some upgrades, but I haven't studied as much, so I don't have an opinion.
But I don't know if you were here when William J. Perry came to MIT, our former Secretary of Defense, and was in charge of the nuclear arsenal. And he said he thinks we should not spend money on upgrading these things, we should just get rid of all the land-based missiles. They are the only reason we need to have trigger alert. And he felt that just scrubbing them all together would not just save money, but make us safer by reducing the risk of accidental war. But there you disagree strongly.
So I disagree strongly with that point. I think that was true during certain points of the Cold War, possibly. I think it's way less likely to be true going forward. I think the risks of accident will just be reduced as the sensors improve for ground-based missiles. And also, like, while we have the ability to launch on warning, that's not actually the US policy. I don't know what the Russian policy is, but like, it's not the case that the US policy is just to like launch because they see something coming. So I actually don't think the accident risk from the ground-based is that high, and because they're the cheapest leg of the triad, like if we're looking to like save money, it's probably better to have ground-based missiles than to like make a whole bunch more submarines, and then you're also like cutting down the numbers, so when AI figures out how to detect submarines, that's just fewer targets anyway.
So what do you think is wrong with William J. Perry's thinking? I have huge respect for him since he has spent so much of his entire life working with us on the inside of the Pentagon. So
I think the analysis of this is relatively recent. Here's the Lieber's paper was like in the past year, and now he's the head of security studies at Georgetown. Like, I think the Pentagon might not necessarily have been paying as much attention to that like concern, because I think this has impacted the NPR. I might be slightly wrong on the dates of things here, but I don't think I'm like off by like 10 years or something like that. I think Will Perry is more familiar with defense constraints further back in the day. I'm not sure like he's like still gets like the up-to-date information. I've taken like one of his classes on like nuclear counterproliferation. Like, I basically agree with like all of his arguments in terms of countering nuclear terrorism and countering proliferation, but I don't think they're actually that strong on like the current modern weapons. I think his arguments are like better in terms of like what was going on in the Cold War.
Okay, I'm glad I didn't have to come in and break up a lot of that. I kind of just like made it naturally. So our next segment is going to be your general takes on what just happened. I think it might make sense to give you guys like 2 or 3 minutes to like stop and maybe talk off the record if you want to, or collect your thoughts, instead of just instantly asking you to review your experience. So I will call the room to order in like 2.5 minutes, and then you guys can share your thoughts on the exercise.
Collecting our thoughts now, or just talking?
Why don't we both like to talk for 1 minute and then we can
Sure.
I'm just
collecting their thoughts on how they think the exercise went. What do you think that?
a little bit of the dynamic that I think makes people just defend their own position. Sometimes people see the emotion out of it. You're seeing anti-debate people.
I want to try that.
I'm trying to do
No, I would at times, maybe like both people try to converge and like, okay, what would change my mind?
Some part of the problem
Instead of just this, like, this is what this is the evidence that they change it. Because I hope that might happen here.
I know that.
You know,
Not even that far. I mean, they're both so red. They're both very similar. It's just lacked a little bit of.
I feel more optimistic about the end of this debate.
Oh, really?
So like they're supposed to represent relatively the extremes of the situation. So if they're not that far away from each other, and wherever the position of the US government is, it's probably not that far away from both of them.
I think building public, though, if you start talking sociology points, it's very difficult to convince people that you start easily criticizing political forum, wherein someone looks weak, Russia looks like they're going to weaken their nuclear arsenal, so people will step back on that. Unfortunately, will not understand.
I wonder how many people involved on each other. We keep part of what you're aiming towards. And that's the technology development.
All right. Our anti-debaters have given the anti-debate some thought and conferred a little bit, and now they're each going to share with us what they thought about this whole exercise, and a little bit after that, I'm sure that some of you will get to share what you thought of the whole exercise in the Q&A.
Sure, I'll go first. So I think like my personality is naturally somewhat agreeable. So like, if I go back and watch this, I'm curious what percentage of the things I have said I will agree with. But I think if I like thought about it and wrote some, then I'd like more thoroughly sort through that. So that's like one observation I have from having this talk. I think a lot of these things require a lot of thought, and it's hard to respond in the moment when it's like I need to like go count numbers and like verify dates and like verify arguments. There's like a lot of that information that's just not already in my head, so I might change my opinion if I like had more information at hand. But overall, I thought this was fairly productive. I think like I see like you're not like for just like get it to zero necessarily, and you see I'm not for like the U.S. has never done compellence. Like yeah, I think we understand each other's positions better now. And I think we agree that like if there's a way that like interests can be aligned and you can pull off arms control and it would be like increasing stability, like you should do that. But I guess we maybe already knew we would like that before, I don't know.
Alright. So I felt it's very, very interesting to learn more about your perspectives. I thought it was fun. I think nothing anti-debate, kind of fun idea. One thing I was surprised by was that beforehand I thought that the reason you had your position was either because you thought that we only wanted them. I was surprised that you seemingly both conceded that we also want to do compellence and you're not really for it, and you conceded that maybe lobbying has played a role in us spending so much money on nuclear weapon upgrades, and also conceding that the point that maybe it's not actually that likely that Putin is just going to nuke us tonight, or even if we significantly disarm. But nonetheless, you still want to have 7,000, keep the 7,000 nuclear weapons and so on. That sort of surprised me because I thought that you were going to defend those assumptions more strongly. But so and then my second takeaway was it was a pleasure talking to you. You clearly are very, very knowledgeable about these issues. I feel you also very good at articulating my point of view. I really appreciate the respectful way in which you carry out this discussion, and that has made me very determined to ask you if you want to continue the discussion over coffee this afternoon.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to start off the Q&A with a question for myself, which I forecast for you a little bit during your comments. I think a good thing to ask at the end of any debate is, okay, you've talked a lot of things out, you've gotten a lot of facts and views on the table. Ultimately, it seems like you still don't totally agree with each other, but do you now have a sense of exactly sort of what would need to change about the world, about your maybe gain theoretic understandings or whatever, to basically accept your interlocutor's view? And that's a question for both of you should answer.
So like, what would need to change for me to like just update to his view? So I feel like there's a lot of just concrete information about like what is likely to be deployed by different countries, what their interests are, and like ways their interests could be aligned that I would need to have to like see a path forward that involves like significant nuclear reductions, where I think it would be like robust, stable deterrence going like farther into the future. Yeah, I feel like it's mostly a matter of like more information about different systems, people's incentives, and the way those can change over time, and a lot of that information is like highly contingent. I sort of see a lot of modernization spending as like basically trying to mitigate risks. And like if we do it properly, we'll be mitigating both accident risk and the risk of like people deliberately doing attacks. But obviously all countries act in their like strategic interest to the degree they can. So everyone's trying to gain an advantage, and that's hard to deal with.
Yeah, I think something which really helped change my mind, closer to your position, is more information revealing that the risk of accidental war is actually a lot lower than I think. Because I find it kind of scary to see that there were so many close calls up until the time which is close enough that things haven't been declassified yet, right? So that makes me really worried that these near misses keep happening, and that we could just have it, you know. Yeah. So I figure if it's 1% per year, it's a chance that we'll have an accidental nuclear war. If it is, you know, Kennedy thought it was 1 in 3 for the Cuba crisis, right? And that was before he knew about the Archibald submarine incident. So maybe it was close to 1 in 2 or whatever. So if it were 1, if it's 1% now, even if it's 1 in 1,000 per year now, that probably means on average 5 million people get killed per year, which as an effective altruist would make it one of the most important causes to work on. But maybe it's much lower than that, right? Which would be very nice. So if we, and the answer to the question, like if there were some mechanism where we could actually find out more promptly about near misses on the US and Russian side, maybe there aren't so many anymore. Maybe for some reason things have got much more reliable. And then if the risk of accidental war is much lower, right, then it certainly becomes less urgent, let's say, to disarm, which would bring me, I think, much closer to your position.
Okay, Q&A is going to go as it has before. Just, I see someone's already eager to take questions, so just come up to your mic here. And anyone else can just line up, get close, and I'll point to you when it's time.
Hi, great to meet you guys. So this question is for both of you, but mostly for Matt. Matt, as himself, somewhere along the line, mentioned scenarios involving like non-conventional mad actors. So like, say something in North Korea, like there's a nuclear use by like not a country that has a really, really robust nuclear program. I think this is also important to think about when you're thinking about smaller scale nuclear deployments. So if rather than like Cold War in ICBM scenarios, you have like localized nuclear use, like in one particular conflict. To what extent do you think that the sort of paradigm of nuclear deterrence and sort of acts as sort of pseudo-stigma as protective against this sort of more localized use of nukes? Because if I'm considering using nukes in some localized encounter, there's some risk now that the United States or some other powerful actor will see that as a use of nuclear weapons that justifies response in kind.
Yeah, I'll say a few words, then you can say a few words too. So, first of all, I think that if the US, if the nuclear powers had really stuck to what they promised to do in the NPT, and very actively disarm, and then also very strongly push back to prevent India and Pakistan and Israel from getting nuclear weapons earlier, then there would be much fewer nuclear weapons today. I think the current risk that Saudi Arabia is going to develop nuclear weapons, which they're talking about now, would pretty much go away, right? Now Saudi Arabia is saying, hey, all these other countries are allowed to have them, you know, why can't we? And I think that reduces the risk of nuclear terrorism also. I feel pretty nervous about the Pakistani nuclear weapons program, some of it coming to the wrong hands, or even Russians. So I think it helps in that way. And second, I think, yeah, so terrorist nuclear attacks are not going to deter with conventional deterrence, of course, because who are you even going to nuke, right? You're going to reduce the risk simply by having fewer weapons that float around and can fall into the wrong hands. Second, a small nuclear state like North Korea, which might have 20 warheads now, to deter them from ever using them, I don't think we need 7,000 or even 1,000. Having the 300 or so that countries like China and France have would be perfectly adequate. It's easy to forget how much you can destroy with even 300 nuclear weapons. I just looked at the list of the 1,000 largest US cities to see how much Russia could take out with its 1/7 of its nuclear arsenal. And I got down at around 950 or so to Woburn, Massachusetts, which is right next to where I live. It's like 40,000 people. It's ridiculous. If 300 is plenty enough, I think, to deter any small state like North Korea, or a large state for that matter.
And sorry if I can, really fast follow-up. Does your answer change if we ignore the disarmament question and focus on R&D of like advanced targeting capabilities, things like that might be useful for this kind of like local use of deterrence?
To do deterrence, we just need to be able to destroy all the large cities in North Korea. I don't think we should be in the business of trying to take out their silos of, that's the whole point of deterrence, that they should be really, really deterred, right? And even though it's often said that, oh no, we only want to hit their silos because we're such nice guys, the most recently declassified US target lists, which you actually have posted, it's an interactive thing, map on the FLI website, has a bunch of cities where it explains why they're targeted. So for some targets it says ICBM complex and Chelyabinsk and so on. For some of them, like Beijing, it just says population. That's deterrence for you. We shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that nuclear weapons are all peace, love, and motherhood. I mean, deterrence is meant to be nasty, precisely so that it's going to work.
So and on that particular note, I think like the U.S. like nuking North Korean cities as like a deterrent isn't super credible because the consequences are like really, really bad for our allies. And in that case, I do think like smaller yield weapons, more accurate weapons, etc. Like in the paper I talked about, like Professor Lieber shows like the impact of like just even current U.S. tactical nuclear weapons and like it not propagating radiation like out of the country if they're using the very small yield ones, whereas with like the sub-based ones or like anything that's like a lot of the conventional weapons, or not conventional weapons, but like the normal nuclear weapons are more like the hundreds of kilotons range. Like if weapons like that are used, then there's going to be like horrible ramifications for U.S. allies, for U.S.'s own troops in the area. Like I think like those weapons are more for deterring large countries where there's like big gap between U.S. interests and like the weapons. So,
wow. Are you actually saying that you think that if North Korea nuked Seattle or Tokyo, that we would not nuke Pyongyang, just a few missile silos?
we might nuke Pyongyang in retaliation for that, but I think we would try to, whatever the policy is, I don't know what the policy is, I assume it's set to try to minimize the casualties for our allies in whatever retaliation process is used. And I think there are some possible retaliatory strikes that are not necessarily large yield nuclear, but I don't know what exactly it would be because I'm not in the military.
Thank you, Ness. Thank you very much for the discussion so far. So, it seems like both of you are focused on what should the optimal strategy be. And the way I'm thinking of this question is, in the end, there are decision makers. Congress, the executive branch, people in the military, and they have an interest in avoiding nuclear war. Then they probably have some personal interests, they have biases, they have things that kind of push them one way or another. And then what we should take, what each one of you is probably doing, is kind of hoping to push against them and get them back, and get them back to the optimal strategy. In other words, what you think are the main biases or interests affecting decision makers, and which way they're pushing them.
I would want to think about this more. Like,
I can start off then if you want. I think something we see again and again and again in history is that politicians, when they are in trouble domestically and are flagging in the opinion polls and approval ratings, have a bias towards towards aggressive foreign policy behavior. Sometimes you see extreme examples like the military junta in Argentina was getting very unpopular, the economy was going down the toilet, so they invaded the Falkland Islands. And for a while, it really helped. People really rallied around them. Then they lost the war, and they got kicked out. But that's a very old trick, and so this is a concern I have, that if, for example, Donald Trump starts becoming on the verge of impeachment or having a lot of problems, that it will be actually in his interest to go bomb some country a little bit more and do something very aggressive. I think that's a bias we have to watch out for.
When I think of biases with respect to like nuclear history, one thing I think of from like the 50s is like the secrecy aspect of compartmentalization. Like it doesn't make sense to like not declare all of your strategies to your opponents. Like there's some in terms of deterrence that it makes sense to declare, but you don't want to like declare like how to destroy all your stuff because this is exactly how your plan works. So like due to the necessities of state secrecy, communication between people in the government can sometimes be cut off, and that can lead to like plans just being like optimized in like poor directions. Like in the 50s, like we had like Air Force Strategic Command like going for like crazy megatonnage nukes. Like I think over 60 megatons was like their goal for certain like weapons just to be able to crater runways, and that's like insane. Whereas like the people in the army who are thinking about nukes were realizing like, oh wow, that's going to create a huge amount of fallout, and that would be like horrible for like us. And like no one was really thinking about like climate implications long term. Like there's just like all these different silos thinking about how to achieve their interests, and the information is not integrated. I think we're starting to get away from that problem more as time goes by, and like it's understood how grievous some of the mistakes of the past were in planning. I think there's possibly even more grievous mistakes in like places like Russia, possibly, where we just don't get to find out about these because like maybe they don't like just show all of their planning decisions so many years later. Like we don't know. But I think like within that information, there's like a lot of relevant considerations that perhaps we just don't get to know. I mean, I think it's possible there's a lobbying bias, but I just don't think that is nearly as powerful as like states considering their interests and like vying for power and stuff like that.
I think a very powerful way of dealing with human biases is to put humans in an organization or a scenario with other people, which can help correct the biases a little bit. And that makes me kind of nervous about the fact that many people don't even know that even though Donald Trump would need permission from Congress if he wanted to invade Mexico, he doesn't need permission from Congress or anybody else to nuke Mexico or to nuke anybody. He can just have a bad swing on the golf course and decide to launch some nuclear missiles somewhere if he wants to, right? And I think it would be much better if such an important decision had to be a bit more firmly anchored in at least group of more than one person. There's even a proposal in Congress to change things a little bit like that.
Thank you both. This has been incredibly interesting. I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on what should the U.S. plans be in the event that we are hit by a first strike and we are responding. Now, it seemed to me like the general consensus was that the best plan from a deterrence perspective is non-targeted bombing of population centers because that provides optimal deterrence and it can't be used in a first strike. But the obvious issue with that is that could cause a nuclear winter, which could cause human extinction and would produce massive consequences for the U.S. So strategically, it doesn't seem like it would make sense to actually carry through that threat. And the alternative, potentially being more targeted strikes to wipe out their military capacity without destroying all of their population centers. But the drawback there being that could be used in a first strike. So I'm just curious where you fall on that trade-off.
I mean, I'll speak first. So I haven't fully decided this in my head, and I think I'll just continuously be updated by reading more. But I do think there's certain cases where you can imagine that strikes on the civilian population aren't the type of deterrence you want. If it's a leader goes crazy, you might specifically want to hold that leader at risk, and that leader's military at risk. And there's an aspect of deterrence where it's the people who are launching that weapon are the people who will be punished so like there's a perspective where like that is like a type of deterrence you want, and that just threatening people's civilian population, like if the leader survives and like he takes over the world and 100% of the GDP is going to him, like does he care in the long run? Like I don't know. Like that's crazy speculation. But like what I'm getting at is there's like cases you can imagine where the optimal deterrence thing is targeted, but yeah, like it can obviously go the other way.
There's been a lot of very interesting game theory work done on this, going back to Herman Kahn again, and what they generally conclude is if for deterrence to work, first of all, it's very important that the other party knows that there will be retaliation. Even though, of course, once you have absorbed one nuclear hit, it might not be in your interest to strike back. You still have to set things up so that you kind of will. So what the game theorists argue is that you should do a proportionate retaliation, but not greatly exacerbate things. So if Seattle gets nuked, well, the U.S. could nuke Pyongyang or tell them even, hey, Pyongyang is going to turn into a nuclear cloud in 10 minutes, and if you don't launch anything further, we won't launch anything further you either. That way you still have more deterrent power, right? Once you've launched your whole arsenal, they have no incentive to not strike you more. If, on the other hand, they only take out a missile complex, maybe the US should take out 2 of their missile complexes and make very clear, even before the explosion, that this is all there's going to be, so there's still a chance to stop. The really scary part about this is there's so little time to figure out whether the leader went crazy or what exactly, because it only takes 30 minutes, for an ICBM to go from Russia to the US. So by the time the president even finds out about it, there might only be 25 minutes left. Not so much time to check out all the details about what might psychologically have happened. Which is why I'm so keen to get rid of the whole hair trigger alert situation. China, I think, is a super interesting case study because they have a very clear-cut, pure deterrence strategy. It's very different from what Russia has. China has about 300 hydrogen bombs, but they're not a hair trigger alert. The warheads are actually not on top of missiles at all. It takes like a week for them to mount them and get them all ready, and they have them on. But they have them in places, and they're very big. They're multi-megatons typically, exactly aimed at US and Russian cities. So we know that if we strike them, at least a bunch of our cities are going to be destroyed. But we have basically zero fear that China is going to launch the first strike against us. So that means it's not 30-minute timescales for a response, it's more like days, which can give more opportunity to figure out what really happened. Which will make me sleep a little bit better at night.
Right. One last question?
Hey Max, thanks guys for the talk. My question is, Max, you've done a lot of work on like quantum suicide and parallel universes and that kind of stuff. So
Don't try it at all.
So some of these, like reading about Petrov and stuff, where he decided not to push the button. Some of that seems kind of, maybe not too good to be true, but kind of in that sort of direction. Like, so I know, like in some worlds he did probably push the button, and in other worlds he didn't. So how likely is it? Like, are we underestimating the probability of it happening? I kind of know the answer is yes, but my question is, how big an effect do you think this is? Have you quantified it?
This is a sore spot you're pressing on here, which definitely makes me worried. So when I said, suppose it's 1% chance per year, you said that that's too high. I think it's a lot lower, right? But
I meant like that's too high to be acceptable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But there could be a selection effect, it's called anthropic selection bias, where if in fact, Vasily Arkhipov had when Captain Savitsky on this had decided to launch this nuclear torpedo in 1962 when it was depth charged by the US Navy and so on. If Arkhipov hadn't been on the ship or hadn't said no, I would never have been in this anti-debate because I wouldn't have been born. I was 5 years later, right? And So given that I'm asking the question, it's pretty clear that a global nuclear war hasn't already happened. So that could suggest that the risk is actually a bit higher than we think. One conclusion you can draw from that is it's a sort of one-sided bout, that it's at least as bad as the risk as you might think from just reading about the near misses. I've never seen someone actually try to carefully quantify how strong the bias is. But coming back to what I said at the beginning, I think the most interesting thing really isn't to quibble about how freaked out we should be. It should be this freaked out or that freaked out or whatever. I think the most interesting question is just what is the most useful thing we could do now? And I'm arguing the point that what we should do is get rid of trigger alert, do significant disarmament, and just try to take things in that direction. I don't think that conclusion hinges at all on whether the risk of nuclear war is double or what we think or half what we think. Even if I think there's very little downside to doing this. This is something we disagree about, but I would prefer just focusing on taking first step in the right direction rather than obsessing about exactly what the probabilities are.
So I agree with a lot of that, though I do think it's going to be the case that, yeah, things are contingent. If, on that, it's not just nuclear war. Like, in the world with, got nuclear weapons, you can imagine, there'd be continued superpower great wars. World War II could kill more people than, any conflict ever. Now, obviously, a nuclear war, if you had that now, that would kill even more people. But it's how many wars would we have had in the meantime? Right. How many would you have going into the future? What would those be like? It's really hard to know all the counterfactuals. So, in alternate world where, there wasn't nukes, how many people are dying right now per year? And, just considerations like that are just really hard to know.
I think you and I would both be actually much happier if there were a situation where we were both convinced that the nuclear weapons were completely invulnerable to attack, so nobody could stop the use of them, so that they were perfect deterrents, and then you would also be comfortable having much fewer, right?
Yeah, correct. So if you just couldn't destroy them, if it was just impossible to deter, or sorry, wrong statement, impossible to destroy the other person's warheads, deterrence would be super stable between states.
How many would you be comfortable having that? 10 each, maybe, or
it just depends on how you evaluate different states' interests. If you have a leader that doesn't care about their population, that's weird. But then again, maybe they do deter by just letting targets straight at them. So it could potentially be extremely low. But on the other hand, depending on how safe people are, or